Hey, I want to ask you this. There's a piece in the Seattle Times, and they say, hey, you know what? If the Washington Supreme Court takes a look at this this millionaire's tax, quote unquote millionaire's tax, and decides, that, income is property, that could have a problem. We might have a problem with capital gains tax, right? The whole
no. Who would have predicted this, John? What a shock.
I think
the Times actually figured this out.
Well, Walsh, as you know, Jamie Pedersen, this is from, public records request, that Pedersen in the Senate said, public records. So here's we go. Pedersen says, this is quote, the more important benefit of passing a capital gains tax, this is back in 2020, is on the legal side. From my perspective, the other side will challenge it as an unconstitutional property tax, making it possible. If we succeed, it enacts a progressive income tax for simple majority vote. Then he goes on, adopting a capital gains tax is one of the best things we can do to help advance the possibility of an income tax in our state. Until that happens, it'll take a 2/3 majority legislator plus vote from the people to adopt an income tax. So their thing was, the Trojan horse was the capital gains. Yes, wait, Joe.
So in this Jim Bruner article in the Times, he's actually suggesting that if the initiative if the initiative gets voted to repeal the income tax, that it would, by definition, automatically repeal basically a capital gains tax.
Walsh, what say you?
Well, I mean, Bruner's screwing it up, as he often gets the details wrong.
Okay.
Here's the piece of it that is valid.
All right.
And this goes around the so-called Quinn ruling.
Yes.
That was the challenge of the capital gains tax a few years ago.
Quinn State 2023. Yes.
Correct. This was the opinion that the state Supreme Court wrote that said, no, capital gains is not an income tax, it's an excise tax.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the part of that opinion that most people know. Okay, they found this tricky way to say that the capital gains tax was okay under state law and constitution. There was more in that Quinn ruling from the state Supreme Court. They basically painted themselves into a corner and said, if there were ever to be a state income tax, this might make us rethink everything we're saying in Quinn decision. And they were not expecting Pedersen to, have no impulse control and immediately try to do a state income tax right away. They were kind of counting on that being kick the can down the road, let the capital gains tax kind of settle in and get established and be there for a few years. But their own language in Quinn acknowledges that the logic they use, the pretzel logic to call it an excise tax, would be much harder to do in a full-blown state income tax, which is what Pedersen almost immediately rammed through the legislature. So the state Supreme Court is caught in a corner of its own making with what it said in the Quinn ruling. So now what Bruner's trying to do, and people who don't like the initiative and want to keep state income tax, is they're trying to say that the state income tax repeal initiative does multiple things. That's not true. The initiative only does one thing, and that is it repeals this state income tax created by Senate Bill 6346 and signed nervously into law as quick as he could do it by the current governor. So they're trying to create this narrative that this actually does multiple things, and they're trying to set it up so that when the initiative passes, which it looks like it will, every polling indicates it will pass, they'll make the argument, well, it should be thrown out by the court because it does multiple things. That gets the court off the hook of having to contradict its own ruling in Quinn. The court could say, well, we're going to overturn this repeal. We're going to keep the state income tax, not because of anything we said in Quinn, but because there's a new problem with this initiative. It does multiple things, and it can only do a single subject. As everybody knows, initiatives have a very strict rule. They can only do one thing per initiative. So they're trying to create this narrative that it does multiple things.
Okay, so it's like a domino effect. So But the intention of the initiative and what the people are voting for, that is limited to one single action, which is the removal of, quote unquote, the millionaire's tax. That's it. But if it has a domino effect,
call it the millionaire's tax. You know the deal. It's a state income tax.
I know that.
The millionaire's thing is a scam.
I know, Jim. In fact, you can't see it. Put little scary quotes around. But so then, what you're saying is, then the Supreme Court would say, well, if you remove that, then it also has another effect, which is the capital gains, and you can't have something actually have. You can't have it can't be broadened other than just one single action, because they kick these things out if it ends up having what you can't have two or three things on one initiative. Correct. Right? So they're saying
it's a common attack that people make on successful initiatives. They say, well, it does multiple things. You got to throw it out, court. But
it does multiple things unintentionally, passively does multiple things, or is it intentionally doing multiple things? Is that matter? The distinction?
Yeah, I mean, there's no such thing as passively. I mean, the initiative has to be drafted to address one point in the law.
Yes.
And this initiative is drafted to address one point in the law: repeal Senate Bill 6346, repeal the state income tax. And it doesn't even have to say why.
Right.
Like, it's not even raising a constitutional issue the way Rob McKenna's lawsuit is. That's a different thing. The initiative doesn't have to say why. It just says repeal this. Why? Because the people are voting to repeal it. That's it. Repeal it. The whole thing. Go ahead.
I saw in the 1960s, what year it was, the Washington State Supreme Court said when an income tax was brought to them before, they said, we're not even going to rule on this. We've done it before. Basically, stop bringing it to us.
And that's what they should say here. But they don't. The initiative is not. It's not even a lawsuit. It's new law made by the people. The people reserve the right to make law by initiative, and this is what the initiative does. And the new law is repeal this screwed up Frankenstein's monster, cobbled together, 100-page nonsense. Just repeal it. Get it out of there. And that is entirely okay. The initiative doesn't have to offer a reason. It just says repeal it. And that's what it does. Now, does this cause some pretzel logic problems for the state Supreme Court? Maybe. But that's the state Supreme Court's problem.
Right.
That has nothing to do with the initiative. The state Supreme Courts, they were silly in what they wrote in the Quinn opinion because they created a potential problem for themselves. That's their problem.
Yeah.
That has nothing to do with the initiative.
So to put it in perspective, so Florida, Alaska, Nevada, Texas, and Wyoming have no state income tax. They also have no capital gains tax. So what they decided to do, the Washington Supreme Court, sort of a Humpty Dumpty, the words mean whatever we want the words to mean, that an excise tax is on what you do. An income tax is on what you make. And the Washington Supreme Court comes along and decides, like, for instance, if you buy alcohol, there's an excise tax on that. That's transactional. So what they're saying is that you had the money in the stock exchange, you put in a sell order, you sold it, so that activity of selling it is considered...
Is what we're taxing.
Is what we're going to tax. We don't see it as income, even though the IRS sees it as income. The Supreme Court was able to sort of find a little noodly way to move through the thing and say, well, no, it was the action of buying or selling, realizing the gains, that itself, we're taxing that action. Like if you were to pay, $50 for a pack of cigarettes in the state of Washington, they tax the excise tax on that sort of thing. So they created this own little thing. Now you're saying if this income tax gets in there, it's going to all of a sudden break this really fragile Humpty Dumpty use of words?
Yeah, but it's even worse than that, John. They could, if they just stopped at saying we consider the capital gains an excise tax, they wouldn't have painted themselves into the corner where they painted themselves. They went on to say other stuff about it that was not even essential to calling it an excise tax. They should have stopped there. Instead, they went on and said, and if you were to pass a state income tax, it would create a tension in our ruling here, so we might have to come back and reconsider this.
Oh.
It's like, why did you guys even say that?
So
it's like,
was it a warning to some
idiot who talks too much about what are you doing?
Yeah.
Stop it saying it's an excise tax.
So do you
saying this other stuff?
Do you think the court was publicly just letting Pedersen know, stop at this point? take what you've got, which is the capital gains tax, and if you bring something else before us, it's going to screw everything up. Leave it as it is and just continue to steal people's money that are realizing gains in the state of Washington and calling it an excise tax? Do you think it was a public
One way,
warning?
not two ways, yeah. John, that is an optimistic read. I hope they're that subtle. Maybe they are. Maybe I've been wrong for a few years, and they're much more nuanced than I think. I think they just didn't think there was going to be a state income tax so fast in just a few more years. I think they thought, we want to write this decision. I think they were nervous about the pretzel logic they used to come up with the excise tax. So they put all this sort of filigree around it. They put all this stuff around it to kind of say, well, we're being reasonable to do this. And if you were to do X and Y and Z, it might change A and B. That's their problem. That is nothing to do with the current initiative that people are signing and likely to vote on this November. The initiative is clean.
Yeah.
The mess is in the Quinn decision written by the state Supreme Court.
Got it. By the way, I was at signing yesterday, and I signed yours on the voter rolls and ID for that. And I wanted to see get your opinion. I don't know if you're up to speed, and I'm sure you are, but I don't want to paint you into a corner here. What do you think of the Supreme Court's ruling about when the ballots can be counted? Did you read some of that, Jim?
I read the whole thing. That's called the Watson decision, and this is U.S. Supreme Court, not state Supreme Court.
Right.
It's a 5-4 split that said ballots do not have to be received by Election Day. They can be received later as long as they're postmarked by Election Day. I disagree with it. I agree with the 4, not the 5. The guy who wrote the dissent for the 4 on the 5-4 split was Alito, Justice Alito. And he made what I think is the clearer, stronger argument there that by allowing ballots to be counted if they are not received by Election Day, you are ultimately kind of eroding the constitutional and statutory definition of Election Day. Election Day has a specific legal meaning. And his argument, he wanted to limit ballots to only being counted if they were received on or before Election Day in mail-in voting places. And the majority, the 5, said no, states can continue, which most do, to accept and process and count ballots that are received after Election Day as long as they're postmarked by Election Day.
Yes.
And in the state in question in that U.S. Supreme Court case was Mississippi, where they allow a short grace period. I think it's 3 days. It might be 5 days. And most states do that. They allow what they call a grace period for a postmarked before Election Day or on Election Day ballot to arrive at the election office. Washington, we have 21 days. And that, I believe, is not a secure system. I think if you're talking about a 3-day grace period, that's one thing. 21 days after Election Day is not good public policy.
I thought Jim. I thought it was a fascinating argument made by both sides, and the 5-4 ruling on this. Amy Coney Barrett had basically illustrated the point that at the time when they were passing these laws, okay, so Election Day is going to be bang on that day, on that Tuesday. Nobody ever thought about the fact that another law that they came up with later on is that it has to be on that day because somebody could travel from state to state and vote in other states. The telegraph, when the telegraph was invented, then they said, okay, now we have to really be able to tighten this stuff up because somebody could be reporting on how many votes were counted in some state, and it might suppress the vote, or people might not turn out. So they looked at the broad history of voting in the United States, and they said, yes, so Election Day is that Tuesday, and that's it. But what about people that are out of state or out overseas? What about military? And then what about other ballots that are coming in? Must be included in this thing. But as you said, the dissent pointed out you can get into a lot of hijinks when you have many, many, many days, and then how many ballots are needed in order for somebody to win. And of course, they went back to talk about Florida and the 87 votes that held up the election in those days. So you're still of the mindset, Jim Walsh, that the state of Washington and perhaps the rest of the country should go back to in-person voting?
Well, that's a separate issue. What we're talking in the Watson case and in this current discussion is about how to make mail-in voting more trustworthy and increase people's confidence in it. You know, in a large scheme, would I like to go back to in-person voting? Yes. But we can make mail-in voting more secure and more trustworthy by making reasonable common sense reforms to how we do mail-in voting now. That's the focus now. That's the reason the Watson ruling from the U.S. Supreme Court is important. That's the reason why the Save America Act in Washington, D.C. is important, is it does things that make the voting system as it exists now more secure and more reliable and more inspiring more confidence in people. You know, we have some of the loosest election law in the country here in Washington State, and the progressive left that is for all this loose law says, well, this is because we want to encourage everyone to participate. Voter participation in Washington is on a downward trend.
Yes.
People aren't voting as much as they used to because they've lost confidence in the security of our system. And we need to make reasonable, common sense reforms to mail-in voting so that people can be more confident in it. The conversation about going back to in-person voting is interesting and important, but it's a separate conversation. What we're talking about now is how do we improve the system we've got?
Right.
And that's what I'm focused on.